All right. It's been about a minute now, so we're going to get started. First of all, I want to say hello and thank you for joining us here for our virtual program. We're going to be doing 4 days of coding camp based upon the software Unity, which is a video game developing software that's used in the actual field. It's very fun and simple and easy to use. Before we do all the diving in and everything, we're going to go over a few ground rules. My name is Matthew, and I'm also joined by two of our chat moderators here. We have Caitlin and Perla. If you could both say hi for us.
Hello.
Hey.
All right. Your mics have been muted on purpose. And if you have program related questions that you would like to ask, we'd like you to do so in chat, which can be accessed at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Your text will only be seen by panelists, not all attendees, and any inappropriate behavior will result in the removal from this virtual program. We will try to answer the questions as we go along, and there will be time for a Q&A at the end of this program here. If you have any additional questions, this program is being pre-recorded and will be archived later onto YouTube after all is said and done. So without further ado, let's get started. This is going to be day one for our coding camp. The most important thing to do whenever you're doing coding and you want to make video games, all that great stuff, is you want to get an idea of what you're doing. So before we even dive in and start writing our first line of code, it's very important to get a few of these questions in our minds of what to do and how to go about making video games. So the first few questions you should start asking yourself when you want to start making a video game is, what is the story that you want to tell? Because most games in today's day and age are story-based, story-driven games. Most games have a plot that the creator wants to tell to the viewer, and they're like, I have all these cool characters, I want to have them all interact in some way. And from that point, you start asking yourself, well, I have all these characters and I have a story I want to tell, but should that story even be in a video game? Most stories are really great and they make, cool movies, great books, things like that, but not everything is meant to be a video game. When you think about making a video game, you want to make something that is an interactive experience that is not only enjoyable for the viewer, but also something that they can interact with and actually, solve puzzles, play different game aspects to it, all that good stuff. And then after all that, you want to ask yourself, is the game I'm trying to make fun? Because fun to you is a very subjective thing. Fun to someone else might be different. Like for me, I mean, I find computational math kind of fun. Not everyone else finds that kind of fun. All I'm saying is that if you want to make a game, it needs to be fun in some form or fashion to everyone around you. And once you've kind of gotten all of these questions in your mind and you've said, yes, I have a story to tell that I think should be put into a video game and it's going to be fun, everyone's going to enjoy it, that's when you start getting into brainstorming and thinking about how is the best way to take all these ideas and put them into the game format. Once we've kind of brainstormed and thought about how we can go about making this game, it's time to start doing research. Now, when you're doing research on video games, you would want to start off by studying the games that you like and start picking them apart and figuring out what it is you like about those games. Was it the soundtrack? Was it the replayability? Was it the fact that you could, play with your friends online together, or things of that nature? What makes the game good to you? One of the things also I think is very important in your research is watching interviews from previous developers. One of my favorite interviews that I've watched was from Game Freak, when Iwata, the lady Iwata, was talking about how they had a really hard time working on the sequel to Pokemon Red and Blue, Gold and Silver, because they had to try and condense all of the coding that they had done into a very small cartridge, and it was very hard to compress the two different regions they had. They wanted to put all of this into one game, and it just wasn't working. And Iwata talks a bit about how they figured out a way to compress everything so that it actually fit into the tiny cartridge and the amount of RAM that they had. Another thing too, I think is important when you're exploring the concepts of games is look into other genres of games. Some games that you just don't really find personally fun in particular, I think is a great way to start. Because when you see all these other popular games that are coming out, there is a reason for their popularity in some form or fashion, even if it's in a genre you're not personally fond of. Not very everyone likes role-playing games or JRPGs, but they're popular for a reason. So I think it's important that you maybe not buy the games outright, but at least maybe watch some Let's Plays, some playthroughs, and see what it is about them that jumps out to you and says, this should be this should be in my game. Before we dive into the high concept that you've and all that, is there any questions that are popping up at the moment?
We do have a question. Someone is asking, who is the target audience for this camp? So will it be experienced programmers, or is it suitable for middle school children with no programming experience?
So the target audience for this camp is going to be about the teenage group, so about 13 and up. If you don't have any coding experience whatsoever, I'm going to go through coding, doing C# as base level as possible so that you guys can understand what's going into it. But this is meant for about beginner to intermediate level, and it is meant for people who are interested in exploring making games for themselves. Does that answer the question?
There was a follow-up question
Sure.
for whether or not Unity is similar to Scratch at all.
So Scratch is a bit different from Unity. Scratch is a much more simple version of Unity. Unity is something that would be the next step up from Scratch, in my opinion. Yeah. Is there any other questions?
Someone is asking, sounds like they want to verify, is this something for ages 13 and up?
Yes.
And another follow-up question, is this software we'll be able to use after the camp?
Yes. So Unity is a free to download software. You do have to make an account with them using your email. I'll get into that a little bit later as we start getting past the more the design phase of the class. I'll also each day I'll also bring this up again about how to download Unity to your computer and how to make an account. It is free to anybody who is just making it for fun. But there are different levels in Unity for when you download it. If you're a student, or if you're someone who is looking to work profitably on it, there are different levels of which you can pay for Unity as well. But there is the free version, hence why we're going to talk about the free version once we get to the actual Unity portion of the class.
I also see, sorry to interrupt, I also see two questions that popped up on the Q&A. First one is, will we do an hour of code?
Yes, that'll be tomorrow is when we're going to get into the actual coding version of this. And so any questions regarding about the coding and stuff, most of the coding aspects of this will be in tomorrow's coding, and then as well as Wednesday and Thursday. So all the next 3 days will be entirely coding.
And the second question is, where can I find Unity?
Unity has its own website. You can actually in Google, you can or just by typing in unity.com, they have a place where you can download their services from there. We're going to move along real quick from any other questions, because we do need to get through the content that we have here today. So let's kind of bring it back in, and I'll answer some more questions a little later on. We do have a few things more to cover. So appreciate y'all for asking all those questions. So let's get back into it. So once you're done with kind of the research and development phase of making a game, you are now ready to go into what is called the high concept. Now, a high concept is basically a video game version of an elevator pitch. It is something that, instead of like most elevator pitches for like shows, books, things like that, the elevator pitch, which when you do a show or things like that, you do not want to reference other intellectual properties or anything like that. You want to try to make it seem as unique as possible. Whereas with video games, nothing is new under the sun. Everything has been made before. So you do want to reference other games in your elevator pitch and your high concept, as well as pin down the different gameplay ideas that you have for the game. So basically, like if you were saying you wanted to make a 2D side-scrolling game, which is what we're going to make with Unity here. So you would start saying, but I want to make a 2D side-scrolling game similar to Kirby, similar to Sonic the Hedgehog, all of those kinds of games, whenever you want to tell people what your high concept is. And it's also good to have a high concept for when you make what's coming up next is your game document. Now, having the high concept there allows you to, keep a goal, a target for what you want your game to be at the end. Now, the game document in particular is more of an in-depth outline that maps out what your game is going to need in order to be complete, in order to be successful, and how to actually get the game made. The things such as asset maps, or another way to refer to an asset map would be the different amounts of art, the different things of coding you're going to need. All these good things need to be, showcased, mapped out, and figured out before you even write your first line of code. It's also important in this game document to give yourself a timeline for how you can get all of this work figured out, put together, and ready to be shipped in a timely manner. Since we're doing it more for ourselves rather than for publication, timeline can be very lax, but if it's for actual publication, it can be very, very crunched. Which brings us to the actual fun part of working on games, and what I want to talk a little bit about more in depth for today. I'll also, at the very end of this, kind of open up Unity, and we'll take a look at the actual user interface for that. But concept art is a lot of fun. But before we get into that, were there any other questions that we had about what we've talked about thus far? No questions?
Sorry, no questions. We were answering them in the chat.
Okay, great. So let's move on to concept art. This is personally my favorite portion of building games. That's just because I have more of an art background. And concept art also is a pretty vague term. As you can see from the photo I've used here, most people, when they think of concept art, they think of, just multiple versions of the same character. So, and then they kind of just pick one, and then that's the piece they use for the game. Where in actuality, concept art and getting your ideas together has very many different levels for which that you have to work through. Starting with, expression sheets. So in most video games, as I said earlier, they're very much character-driven, story-driven games. So in order to help the player relate to and recognize the character, you want to have them be able to give you a personality beyond just what they're saying and what they're doing. You want to have expression sheets. Expression sheets are basically just drawings of the character doing various, emotions, doing different actions, things like that. It's, just a good idea to have an idea for your character without having them say or show any line of dialogue. Now, weapons and objects, weapons, very easy, swords, guns, all that sort of stuff that kind of goes into games. Pretty simple. Now, for objects, however, that could actually just mean anything and everything. Objects, like, mostly are referred to things that are put into the background, like set dressing, things like that, where, it could be, cups, things that are on desks, like stationery, ink, pens, all this good stuff. All of this stuff is drawn and comes up with by a environmental artist, or as someone else called a material artist as well. Material artists are basically tasked with drawing everything under the sun to make sure that the worlds that are being built for these games make sense to the viewer, and that they all set like a mood, things like that. That's why we have people who draw all of these different environments for the game, for the world to be in, so the players have an immersion into this world that you're trying to create for them, especially if you're making a fantasy game, things like that. But in terms of also setting the moods, that brings us into mood boards. Now, this is a term that doesn't come up very often, and I think it's important that if you're ever wanting to design a game, that you understand what a mood board is. A mood board is basically just a broad amount of reference material that you use to help you get an idea of what you want the game to look like. Most directors will give you, very loose outlines of, hey, we're going to have a level and it's going to be an abandoned mine, and it's going to have these monsters that have torn up the place, and that's all you get. So you're like, well, okay, so I now have to figure out how to set this mood of, we're in an abandoned mine, which should probably be scarier. We have to make sure that if there's monsters in there, you want to show that the environment behind it has all of these different things. So you're going to go do a lot of research and making sure that the game level looks to what the director wants you to have. And basically, I have multiple mood boards whenever it comes to different levels, as well as, making sure that you're like looking at, proper architecture, style guides, all these different things that kind of come to mind now when it comes to mood boards. They're actually a very pivotal part in getting the idea of what the game should look like onto paper. Finally, we also have our model sheets. Model sheets is kind of what we show here in this image here, where you have multiple versions of the character. We have, a 3/4 view in this one, but also you'll do a side view, front view, back view. It helps the person who ends up taking the character design and turning them into sprites so that they can run through the game a good idea of what the character is going to be looking like throughout the entirety of the game. The actual last bit, though, this is more for games that are putting in cutscenes. Now, cutscenes are scenes that are cut into the gameplay that showcase story, have the characters talking, things like that. So there is a portion where you want to make sure that the game is storyboarded out so that they know how to do the cinematics when they actually get to coding that in the game. That was a lot to digest there, I know. Were there any questions that came up from that?
We had a question about whether or not you could duplicate a character instead of drawing it multiple times.
Yes, actually, and I'm glad you asked that question, because in our demo today, we're actually going to be working on a model sheet as well as doing the actual pre-development of figuring out how and where to go with a game. And I personally agree that you should always work smarter and not harder when it comes to doing these things. Actually, we're going to go back a slide here. As you can see, if you look at the waist, from the waist down on these bird characters, these are actually just the same drawing over and over again. The artists, what they do is they will select specific areas, copy it, paste it over, and from there, they'll maybe recolor it or darken it. As you can see on some of these pants, there are different colors and things like that. But the tops themselves pretty much are the only thing that are different from these character designs. So we'll start getting into our demo here. Let me get switched over. So for our demo, I do want to talk briefly about how to research and how to get an idea of what you want your game to look like and how to develop the high concept as well as making a game document. But we do plan on getting to the actual drawing phase of, making the model sheet. Does that answer the question?
We haven't heard back, but I believe it does.
Okay, thank you. So let me get moved on over here. Let's see. Let's go to this one then. So I've personally prepared a little bit of my search as well as getting my notes together for our game. I'm personally working on a game that I've already titled Mask of Eos because it's based on a character that I've had show up in a lot of different pieces of art that I usually just am drawing. Like this character in particular, I've been messing around and having them being doodled in the back of multiple sketchbooks. I've drawn multiple pieces for them, and they sometimes just randomly find themselves in other media that I've drawn. So I personally think I want to make a game with this character. From there, that's when we kind of are like, all right, I want a character. I have a story. I think it'll be make a good video game. And I'm pretty sure, based upon what I want to do with this game, I think it'll be a fun experience for players of different varieties. So then it comes after you kind of, figure out what you want to make. This is where the actual mood board and actual research comes in on figuring out how to get, your art and your ideas together. One of the things that I think is important when you're trying to figure out, what it is you're looking for and how you want the world to look, it's always a good idea to go look at real places. So I personally have decided that since this character is very much a masked themed character, that I wanted to look at Italy. Italy has, a lot of different wonderful places that you can actually reference from. We have lots of different cool photographs, things like that. And when you're doing your research, it's very important that when you research these, that you want to make sure that your search tools has been set to Creative Commons license. This allows you to grab photos and things like that without having to worry about any copyright or anything like that. That does come up every once in a while when working in games. People will get a little bit, antsy on the idea that you've referenced something or traced over things like that. But be sure to that if this is set to Creative Commons license, you're fine to just use it as reference. And as I said before, I wanted to have a very mask theme for the game. So Carnival is something that I think is a very interesting holiday and has a lot of cool designs. So from here, this is where you would grab photos, kind of put a folder together of different material that you're like, well, I like this design for this mask. I'm going to use this later. So that sort of thing. Another thing I also really advise upon doing when you're working in your own games, working in your own art direction, is to look at other artists. There's a lot of people who have done really great art, and that they also are very, a great way to get inspiration from. Now, I wouldn't say that you should just directly copy from somebody, but you should definitely see different artists and see what they're doing and kind of take inspiration from them. I personally found some artists here that I think would make great, reference material as well, because they have, the really good lighting and you want specific ideas. A lot of this kind of stuff ends up finding its way into a lot of concept art books, a lot of visual development and things like that, was where you're like, oh, I want to draw, we've got trees here, for instance, but you want to draw multiple types of foliage because each level might be a little different. But once we've kind of got our mood board together, that's when we're going to get into our high concept. Now, I've already made a high concept for this game. I'm calling this game Mask of Eos because, again, masks are a very important theme for this game. And I wanted that to be the idea behind how the character uses powers and things like that. So in my high concept, I make a direct reference to the fact that I want them to use a mask change system where they have different masks that have different powers and things like that. And that they go through the world collecting masks by eating the enemies, kind of like how they do in Kirby and in Mega Man. So I'm not only having a very simple and concise pitch, but I'm also making references to previous games so that the person reading it can understand what it is I'm trying to make. And from here, this is a little tidbit of how to kind of get your ideas in order. And I noticed here I've already made a mistake. So game framework here, I seem to have said it was in 3D. I actually want this to be in 2D because I personally like the 2D side-scrolling games, and Unity that we're going to be working in our coding is going to be in a 2D format. So as you can see here in the table of contents, I've been trying to map out and get ideas of different iterations of things that are going to need assets for or sprite sheets for. Like we want NPCs that the character can talk to, enemies that are going to be, having animations and things like that. So as you kind of like go through, you start thinking, I need X, Y, Z for my game, and it starts getting very long, and you kind of go through and you're like, oh my gosh, it feels like there's a lot to do, and there is, but it helps you break down what exactly it is you need for your game. Were there any questions before we move on into the more visual development aspect of it?
We do. Oh, it looks like Caitlin just answered. Someone asked, do we have to do 2D?
No, this is for this course, we're going to be doing 2D. If you prefer to work in a 3D environment, that is totally up to you. This class, though, however, is going to be primarily focused on working in a 2D environment. So that is, since this class is going to be focused on 2D environments, I'm going to be making everything in a 2D environment as well. I don't know exactly why my thing said 3D up here, but we fixed it, so it's good. Does that answer the question?
Yes. Thank you.
No problem. Anything else before we move on?
Someone is asking, do you need a stylus to draw?
A stylus? Actually, no, you don't technically need a stylus to draw. I am actually going to be working using a stylus and a tablet. If you need to use a tablet to draw, you can always use our digital creation space that has access to these things once they become available for public use. Personally, I prefer to work in traditional, so you don't even have to use a computer to do your art for when you're doing just basic concept design stuff. It is what's the word I'm looking for? It's more the professional norm to be working in a all digital format. But if this is for a personal, game that you're trying to make, the way you draw is up to you. I prefer pen and paper. You can also do pen and paper as well. The reason most people work in digital formatting in general is just because it makes the actual pipeline and the flow of work a little bit faster. All right. If there's any other questions, feel free to ask as we go along, because we're going to now move on and I'm going to start talking about the concept art aspect. Let's go to a new share here. So this is a character that I was kind commissioned to do a while back. We're not going to work with this character. This is about the part I was talking about where we're going to work a little smarter and not harder on ourselves. As you can see here, I've already cut open 2 layers to work with. Whenever I'm working over top another piece of art that I've already done, what I like to do is take the layer that has all the art there, and we're going to change the opacity from 100%, as you can see where I'm mousing over. We're going to change it to about, well, roughly 50% here. Maybe a little lower, maybe a little higher. Yeah, basically so that you get an idea that it's just there to help you, you know, as a guide. From there, I like to grab on the layer above it, just a regular brush, and kind of with the tablet here, I'm just gonna take a little sketch here. Bear with me here. I work pretty sketchy here whenever I get started on the character design here. I'm actually gonna move the tablet just a smidge so I can work at an angle. This is also one of the things about getting comfortable. So as you can see here, I've gotten this circle here. This is about the size of our character's head. When working with art and things like that, the average person is about 8 heads tall. So what I'm going to do is I've grabbed what is called the lasso tool, and I'm going to just do a grab here to make sure it's all selected. I'm going to hit Control C, which is copy. If you're using a Mac, it's Command C. And then I'm just going to hit Control V or Command V if you're using a Mac to copy and paste it. So make sure we're on the right layer here. And as you can see, I'm going to just let this nudge down because we're about there, and then I'm just going to merge down. Actually, a quicker way to do this instead of just selecting it is you can also hit Control A, which will select the entire canvas. Then we're going to do the Control C and then Control V, and we're going to move this guy over.
Matthew,
Yes.
We had a question.
Of course.
For your concept art, do you have a recommendation for the starting canvas size in pixels?
I usually work for doing concept art. I try to work in 11 by 17 in terms of inches. Let's see here. For the resolution, I usually do. We'll just do a new thing here. Makes it a little easier. I prefer to work in inches rather than pixels. It just makes my life a whole lot easier because I don't know the units of pixels as well. So we have the width being 17, height being 11, and we want to make sure our resolution is set to 300 pixels per inch. The color mode is RGB for this specifically. The reason we do RGB is because most concept art is not meant to be printed. It's meant to just go online. If we wanted this to be printed, we would switch it to CMYK. We also do want to change it from 8-bit to 16-bit. That just makes it so that it is a little easier to see regardless of when you export it. It will to JPEGs. It'll keep most of the high quality for the images. So instead of doing that, though, we're going to just close this out. Well, does that answer the question?
It does. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And I'm just going to jump in to also mention the Adobe software is available for free at all 5 locations. We have a public Adobe computer that you can use, or you can go to the digital creation spaces at Haggard or Par.
All right. Yeah. And as you can see, what I just did there is I've merged this into one layer again. So that way I can just continuously grab. And now we have our thing that is going to be 8 heads tall. As you can see, this character is pretty short. They're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 heads tall. And we want our main character to be about 8 heads tall, since they're a bit of on the taller side. So what we're going to do then is we're going to resize this to make sure that this fits a little bit better for what we're trying to do. We're just going to make sure that this is resized just a smidge. So I'm going to hit what is Control and T. And this is for our, if we want to make it smaller. So you just drag the corner here, make it a little smaller, call it a day. All right. This just helps me get a good idea of where everything's supposed to be at. There we go. So now we have a thing that says that this is 8 heads tall, and it helps us keep a good idea of where everything is in correlation to each other. So I'm going to do a new layer. And on that new layer, we're going to actually make some guides here. We'll do that later. Let me first get an actual little sketch down here. Also, if you ever make a mistake, don't worry. We have a little lovely tool called Control-Z, which is your undo button, basically. It's great. It is your best friend whenever working in digital art. What we're going to do. So, when working also with your bodies here, notice how this person has fairly broad shoulders. Most people's shoulders in actual anatomy are about half a head in distance between the two. So go back here. We're going to say that we don't want it to be that wide for our character. Go a little bit down here. And kind of just, as we go, just kind of sketch it out. And we're working, as you can see, pretty loosely right now. Because, again, we're just here to try to get a feel for where our character is at. While I'm drawing this out, is there any other questions?
No questions right now.
Okay. But as you can see, one of the things that I talked about when I was mentioning working a little smarter as opposed to harder is that since I've already drawn a model sheet from previously, basically just going back over and tracing it and using it as just a kind of, a guide really helps you out whenever you're trying to figure out what it is that you're looking for in your new character. Because again, if you've already done all of the work beforehand, you might as well just, grab it and go. And this one is also really nice to do here. So we're going to grab with our lasso tool this character that we've already drawn here and kind of sketched out loosely. Seems I missed a few parts here, so we're just going to hold down shift while we're using it, and it lets us grab more pieces. And then we're going to copy it using the Control-C that we talked about earlier, and then we're going to paste it. And move this off to the side here just a bit. And voila, you've actually drawn both the front and back view for your sketch already. See how easy that is when you just now start working in, thinking about, the front and the back are basically the same at the sketch level. Also make your move point to. Oh, go ahead.
We have a question in the chat. Someone is asking, are there previously designed characters within Unity that we can choose from if we are more interested in the coding at this point and less interested in the art? Or do we absolutely need to design a character, even a very basic one?
So I'm actually glad that they brought that up. We're going to talk about this at our little wrap-up thing here. Is there are plenty of websites that offer pre-designed characters and pre-designed sprites for those characters free of charge. It's let me pull up the website real quick here, and we'll switch on over to that, and I can actually show you the website. That's a very good question. There we go. So, come on here, work with me. There we go. So there's a website called craftpix.net. Let's go switch on over. Okay, so as you can see here, did that actually go through? Are we seeing it?
Yes, we are seeing it.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure. So we have this website here that has a bunch of different game kits that they have. Some of them are free, some of them are not. You do have to make an account to be able to download them. So what we want here are sprites and characters, as you can see up top. They have a lot of different packs that you can go through, and each one of them has a little icon here. Some of them cost money, but as you can see, this one here is free. When we get into the actual coding, none of this stuff that I'm drawing at this moment is probably going to be what we're using. I actually have some pre-made sprites that are a little bit easier to work with from different classes that I've taken in the past. But as you can see here, there's a whole bit here that's already animated. It has its idle animation set, its hurt animation, if it's going to be doing an attack here, though it is weird that it says punch and he's clearly kicking. But as you can see, they have a whole library of pre-made sprites that you can download for free just with an account. Does that help?
We have not gotten a response yet, but yes, he said yes. Thank you.
Yeah, great. No problem. Let's move on then. Here, we'll go back to our model here. Okay. But sorry, let me get back here. Yeah, so as I was saying, with this, one other thing that can help you in working with making characters, making sure they're on model and staying within the parameter is adding what are called guides, which you can do. Put that back there. From the view menu, we'll say new guide, and we want, I believe we could do both vertical and horizontal. So let's start off about 100 pixels. Yeah. As you can see, now a blue line has appeared. Now, using these kind of blue lines, and also this does help to know whether or not you're working within inches and in how big the pixels are as well, is you can actually use these guides to help you lay out your characters. And we're going to do this at, let's try 200, just for the sake of this. And as you can see, now that these blue lines are here, I'm going to see if we can zoom in on these will help you act as a guide saying like, this is the max height for our character. And this is the max width that we have to work with as well. So these sorts of tools are in your disposal to be able to help you design and make your model sheet. Now, let's see here. Okay, so let us move on. I'm going to try to pull up a new screen here. Here we are. Sorry, there's a lot of different stuff going on here. I want to bring up some of the different resources that we have available. I mentioned CraftPix earlier because that is where you can get a lot of different free to use already pre-made sprites. The next one is asprite.org. That website in particular is made for if you wanted to draw in a particular sprite format that's not Photoshop. Not everyone has Photoshop. They do have things like GIMP as well as this website that are free alternatives to Photoshop so you can use to draw your characters out. A lot of the stuff that we're going to be working on throughout the rest of this week too is also available through our LinkedIn Learning courses, which are free to use if you have a library card with Plano. You can actually go onto the LinkedIn Learning site, sign in with your library card, and these specific classes that I have listed down here are all the different courses that we're going to be using from in order to make our own 2D game as well. That is about it. But before we go, I'm going to actually open up Unity real quick here so that y'all have a chance to take a look at the layout and the overview of the actual site itself. So bear with me here. So let's see here. Whenever you open up Unity, it does take you to this hub here.
So we don't see Unity, Matthew.
Oh, you don't see it? Oh, that's a shame.
No.
Let me get that fixed up here. All right, are you seeing it now?
Yes.
All right, great. So whenever you open up Unity, you get this little hub here. And as you can see, I've got a few different projects here listed out. We're going to make a new project here just for the sake of what we're going for, just so you have an idea of what Unity looks like. So when you open up and make a new project, it'll give you the option to make either a 2D game, a 3D game, high definition RP, as well as part of the universal renderer pipeline. These bottom two, don't worry about them. This will never be brought up whenever you're making games for the most part. 3D is more for if you're interested in that aspect, but for the purpose of this course is we're going to be doing 2D. So we're going to have 2D selected. Project name, we're just going to do an example for this case here.
It's not showing that second window.
Oh, really? That's very counterintuitive that it would do that. Okay, but as you can see here again now, 2D is off to the corner here, 3D over here, and these two bottom ones don't worry about. And we're going to title it example. The location for where you want to save it to doesn't actually, it's up to you. It's not a big deal either way. And we're going to hit create.
I'm going to need to change the window that you're sharing again.
Okay. Give it a sec, actually. So it's just trying to open everything now. So once it decides to open, we'll get back to it. So I'm going to share our Q&A page. So while it's getting ready to load, I'm more than willing to answer a few questions. Are there any questions?
There was one, but Caitlin just answered it.
Okay.
Someone was asking for a link to Unity.
Oh, for sure. Thank you. Yeah, Unity is a bit of a slow software. Don't worry too much about it taking a while. It's just going to be one of those programs that does that because it does have to pack a lot of different material into it. But it is also nice because of the fact it's very accepting of different, that's what I'm looking for, file types, things like that. It does, you can actually, if you wanted to do lines of code, you can actually just open a text editing document, like, for Mac, it would be text edit. For PC or from Microsoft products, it would be a WordPad. You can actually do that, all of that coding off to the side, and then just import, just click and drag once it's ready to go into Unity. It's really nice the way it can take from any computer and just work all on its own.
So Matthew, we did have another question. Whether or not we had to draw 3D sprites as well.
For 3D sprites, that's actually a completely different process. So when making 3D model sprites for characters, you're going to be doing, instead of making sprite sheets in Photoshop or in Sprite or in GIMP, 3D modeling softwares are going to be your best bet for that. Those are a completely different animal in and of itself. So for that, we'd have to do an entirely different coding class for that. The best way to make good 3D assets for characters would either be in ZBrush, which is a software that you basically just have a ball to start off with, and you kind of sculpt it into your characters, and then save it separately in a T-pose, so that way the animators can come in and actually animate using the 3D Unity software.
We have a couple more questions as well.
For sure.
Someone is asking, can you show the sources that we can use for the Unity development again?
Of course, yeah, I can go right back to that real quick. Oops. There we go. And there is a lot. And I will say that all of these courses that are listed here, while it shows that there are maybe like an hour-long or 2-hour-long course, that is pretty deceiving because they do go pretty quickly through the code. These videos do have a belief that the people who are watching them already know how to do C# and how to write coding. So they will talk pretty quickly and go through briefly about how certain bits of coding talk to each other, but they don't really talk about what means what in coding. I will try my best when I'm going through coding through the next couple of days to explain why I'm using certain lines of coding that I am. And we're also going to have handouts that go through the entirety of the course. So if anything like that comes up or questions like that, I'll be more than happy to try to go through and break down the process of why each bit of coding is written the way it is. Does that answer
another?
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, we have another question. Someone is asking, can you use Blender for making games?
I don't know too much about Blender as a software to make a well-educated answer on that. So I can't really answer that one. I apologize on that. But for most of my understanding for making the video games using Unity is that you can make your assets, make the sprites, make all of the coding and various things, so long as they are saved as, specific file types. Unity can take it and make it into the coding that's needed. But I couldn't tell you if Blender is a good alternative for that. Okay, we do have about 5 minutes left, so I have gotten Unity loaded since that time we've been asking questions. So I'm going to do a new share to show you what Unity looks like on Windows. Now, yours might look a little different from mine, because I personally like mine set to dark mode. That usually will sometimes come in these, this area will be white, but I personally like it in dark mode. It's easier on my eyes and it doesn't hurt. Now, as you can see here, there's a lot of different doodads and a lot of different words and a lot of different tabs and such to go through. And it is pretty intimidating at first. I'm not going to lie. When I first started using Unity, it was a whole different animal from anything I had worked with previously. But I want to assure you all that it is actually a lot easier to work with than it lends itself to look like. This is the default way it will show up and how everything is laid out. We're going to work with this, and we're going to make this a little different when we get into our day 2 tomorrow. We do have about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to turn it over for any last minute questions before we sign off and say goodbye for today.
We do have a question. Someone is asking, where do you write the codes in Unity?
Where do I personally, or just in general?
I think they're referring to just in general.
In general. So for the way Unity works is we're going to actually make a little folder here. So when you, excuse me there. So in Unity at the bottom here, where we see assets, what we're going to do is we're going to make a new folder. Create folder, and we're going to call this scripts. And we're going to open this folder, and we're going to make a new usually whenever I make games, I also start off by making sure we have all of our folders ready, but we're going to do this real quick. So in Unity, you are going to hit create C# script right here. And then we're going to leave it as this. And then what you'll do here is, as you can see off to the left, the right-hand side here, there is a lot. There's coding right here that you can, if you double click on it, it'll ask you to open it in a specific text editing file, or it's text editing software. So it automatically will try to open it in another software and try to lend itself to like a text editing document. Sometimes if you haven't had it properly set up, it'll try to open it in Microsoft Word. That doesn't really work very well. You want it to open in a Notepad, because Notepad is formatted specifically to be able to handle coding, as opposed to Word, which is supposed to be a Word document rather than a coding document. Does that answer the question?
They have a follow-up question.
For sure.
Is C# a computer language?
It is, yes. C# is the computer language with which we are going to be working in to make our video game. It is basically, think of it as a variation upon HTML coding, with which we're going to be just typing out lines of code to make sure that each aspect of the game is talking to each other. I'm going to switch on over back to our resources here because we are almost out of time. We have time probably for one more question before we have to go. Is there any last questions?
We do have one. Do we have to install anything to run C#?
No, not at all. That is, again, something you just have to make sure that you're using a text editing document such as WordPad or Notepad, depending on if you're using a Mac or a PC. All right, I'm going to leave this resources list up here for before we sign off, just make sure everyone can write down what they're seeing here or maybe take a screenshot. But that is about it for us for today. I want to say thank you all for coming for day one. Tomorrow is going to be specifically focused on creating sprites, creating sprite sheets, and importing that art and making animations in Unity tomorrow. So without that, thank you all for joining us.